Our Father in heaven, Lord, we thank you so much, Lord, for another beautiful and blessed Sabbath day. Lord, we come to you this morning with humble hearts, Lord, asking for your presence as we enter into our worship hour, Lord. We ask that you continue to be with us and guide us and strengthen us during these times, Lord. We thank you for the connection, Lord, that we have of Zoom, Lord, and I just pray that all of our time together will be a blessed time. I ask that you be with this presenter this morning, dear God, that could give them the wisdom and understanding, and also all the members on the call as well, dear Lord. Please supply us all with a special supply of grace today, I pray. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Okay, we're going to continue the subject on Islam. And this particular study I've mentioned before is, let me get back to it, is Brother Atabo, who's in Kenya. Him and I have been kind of going back and forth on the different, sharing the different things that we're learning. This one here goes back to Muhammad. I'm also working on, and if anybody wants to join in on that's great, but anybody else that wants to help out with it, on the House of Saud and the role of Saudi Arabia, because there's an awful lot there that will help us, because what we want to, we know that the Islam is the increase of knowledge and understanding on Islam. So I still have a lot of questions as I go through it, but the history, going through the history has helped a lot. At least it's interesting to see how there are so many different factions, just like here in the United States and Protestant America, you have all these different factions of Protestantism. You kind of got that same thing going on with Islam as well, with mainly though the Shia and the Sunnis. So, but even within them, like with the Sunnis, you go further back to the Wahhabis. So there's a lot to understand, and something that was pointed out, I think it was last week, but that what is being seen is when there's victory for the King of the North, as in 1989, you have the rise of Islam. And when there's victory for the King of the South, you have the restraint of Islam. So, and we went through that study, that the restraint of Islam in 2019 and in 2020, it's a period of time, a period of restraint upon Islam, with the death of al-Baghdadi and the breaking up of ISIS through the Syrian war, where they came in and got into the Syrian war as well. So anyways, there's lots to understand. And if we're to see the rise of Islam at 2021, then the question is, what does it look like? And that's what we're trying to, get to by understanding the history. What does it look like? But the lines show clearly, when we take Daniel, the study that we've been looking at on Daniel 11:40, through Josiah Litch's literal interpretation, that you see, we see when you come to 1840 that you have a restraint on Islam, and that restraint lines up using the 10-year Syrian war, 1831 to 1841, and the Syrian war that we're now studying from 2011 to 2021, that 2020 actually shows on the lines as a restraint of Islam. So, and that comes through the methodology of study. So anyway, so with that, we'll begin this. The light that Daniel received from God, and I can't see the chat again, so if anybody has questions, feel free to blurt them out as we go through this. The light that Daniel received from God was given especially for these last days. The visions he saw by the banks of the Ulai and the Hiddekel, the great rivers of Shinar, are now in process of fulfillment, and all the events foretold will soon come to pass. When the books of Daniel and Revelation are better understood, believers will have an entirely different religious experience. Knowing the principle will help master the details, but a study of the details is necessary to prove the existence of the principle. Principles in nature and revelation are discovered after earnest, patient, tireless research. Constant contact brings to light the fact that things which at first seemed unrelated details are held or grouped together by governing principles. And that was Louis Weir, that last comment. So it's become really important to understand geography, to understand the lay of the land. And we see here going through Iraq, you have the River Euphrates and you have the Tigris River, the Hiddekel and the Ulai. The purpose of this prophetic discourse is to illustrate the nature of Islam at Panium, 2021, and that's Daniel 11:13 to 15, to the Sunday Law time period by looking into several lines of thought, one of them being Revelation 9, the first and the fourth generation, understanding of Daniel 11:40, which we've been discussing, and also Numbers 22, the story of Balaam in relation to the ship of Adramyttium in Acts 27. In this discourse, we're going to use triple application, an important improved principle of prophetic interpretation that demands Bible students to look into the two preceding histories of any prophetic subject and combine them in order to understand the nature of the third. So World War I plus World War II equals World War III, and we also have the first woe plus the second woe equals the third woe. So understanding those first two would give us understanding to the third woe. On October 3rd to the 13th of 2018, the line of the tribe of Judah opened up the midnight cry message in repetition of the Millerite history. The message or the theme of the midnight cry message, among other subjects, was embedded upon the King of the North and the King of the South, especially the victory of the King of the South connected to the model of equality. As the message continued to develop, the line of the Third Diadochi War was opened up, war that was sparked through tension between Antigonus and Eumenes at the end of the Second Diadochi War. After the death of Alexander the Great, Daniel 8:8, in 323 BC, he left behind dozens of generals who plunged the kingdom into wars, or called the Diadochi Wars, the successor wars, as a vocation in order to succeed the empire, because Alexander did not have an able successor of the kingdom.
Mr. Lane?
Huh?
Adriana got kicked out of the thing, so the program is not being recorded. Would you like to make me a host so I can start recording?
It says it's recording.
Is it still recording? Okay.
Does it show that for you guys?
Yep. Okay. So she's recorded to the cloud. So that's awesome. Okay, great. Thank you.
So I don't know how that works, but it does say it's giving me the option to pause or stop recording. So that means it's recording, right?
Correct. Yeah. She put it to the cloud, so that's perfect. So no problems. Okay. And it looks like it reverted back to you as opposed to Adriana.
Okay. So leave it the way that it is then?
I believe so. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, let's see. So he left behind dozens of generals who plunged the kingdom into the Diadochi Wars as vocation in order to succeed the empire, because Alexander did not have an able successor of the kingdom. At the end of the second Diadochi, two most powerful generals were left, Antigonus and Eumenes. So you get to that Second Diadochi War, and you've got these two left. All the rest are, you have the other four that are here. The last war, the Fourth Diadochi War, left 4 generals after the Battle of Ipsus in 301 BC. In the line of the Third Diadochi War, we were confronted with the peace of the Dynasts that's 311 BC waymark, which by diligent application parallels with Panium, and that's 2021. Antigonus, while marching towards Egypt in response to the Battle of Gaza, where his son Demetrius was defeated by Ptolemy, was obstructed by the Nabateans. They obstructed Antigonus's armies and Seleucus. And so who were the Nabateans? So we know we have the Third Diadochi War up here, the line of the Third Diadochi War. We know we have the Battle of Gaza being Raphia 2019, and you start to see the rise of Seleucus, the king of the north. And then we see at Panium this interaction with the Nabateans. So first, Josephus, the ancient Jewish historian, identified the Nabateans with Ishmael's eldest son. He claimed that the Nabateans lived through the whole country, extending from the Euphrates to the Red Sea. Here refers to this area as Nabatene, or the area the Nabateans ranged in. Josephus goes on to say it was the Nabateans who conferred their name, son of the Arabian nations. By this statement, we can assume to mean that during his lifetime, the word Arabs and Nabateans had become synonymous. Josephus lived and wrote during the time that the Nabateans were in existence, and supposedly he obtained his information directly from the Nabateans themselves. So we see here on the map this area that is referring to the Nabateans. The first definite appearance dates from 312 to 311 BC, when they were attacked at Sela, or perhaps at Petra, without success by Antigonus, his officer Athenius, in the course of the third Diadochi War. At that time, not sure what that word is, Hieromonus of Cardia, or a Seleucid officer, mentioned the Nabateans in a battle report. Antigonus appointed one of his officers, Athenius, to attack the Nabateans and take their herds as booty. Athenius marched with 4,000 men and 600 horsemen into Petra, Nabatea's stronghold, during the night time while the Nabatean men were away trading. Coming from Judea, and after 3 days travel across 160 kilometers, Athenius captured the place easily, as only women and children were present, and the troops loaded themselves with as much frankincense and myrrh as the animals allowed, and stole around 13.7 tons of silver. This was a quote that I was working on last night and adding in as I was reviewing the notes. And I pulled this from Wikipedia, just some information on the I was trying to find the connection, more information on Antigonus and the Nabateans. But it just caught my attention that the troops loaded themselves with as much frankincense and myrrh. If we're looking parable-wise, and this is this battle with here at Panium, what does frankincense and myrrh represent? Any thoughts?
I don't know.
Don't know.
Royalty or burial?
I didn't look into it to prove it, and so if anybody has any comments on it, feel free. But I'm thinking about the purification process as well, and I don't know that for sure. We know that the wise men brought, or the Magi brought, frankincense and myrrh and gold, right, to when Christ was born.
Were those just gifts though?
Yeah, they were gifts. Yeah. And anyway, so I put it there to remember to ask the question, if anybody has any thoughts on that, because
Economic wealth.
economic wealth thing. Did you look it up?
Yep.
Yeah.
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay. And I think that may be more accurate. It struck me as just thinking about the time period we're living in and the purification process. And as we're going to look into Esther in the afternoon, that the virgins go through this purification process, and a lot of these spices had to do with that purification process. So it was just a thought that I wanted to ask about, and I didn't see what anybody else thought on that. The Nabatean women and children found they were to be taken and sold as slaves. Athenius and his troops regrouped as dawn broke and set off where they came from, making camp around 36 kilometers away, assuming they were safely away from the Nabateans. Spotted by some nomads while they were leaving, an 8,000 Nabatean camel cavalry force, superior to horses in such a barren terrain, came in pursuit only hours later. A few prisoners escaped from the camp at night and managed to tip off the Nabatean force on the whereabouts of the camp. They engaged the Greeks with javelins while they were asleep and freed the families. Based on Hieronymus, Diodorus described how all the 4,000 foot soldiers were slain, but the 600 horsemen, about 50 escaped, and of these, the larger part were wounded. The Nabateans sent a letter of complaint in Aramaic, I think that's the language of the ancient Middle East, to Antigonus. The letter argued that the Nabateans did not want war, but were forced to attack the Greeks in self-defense. Antigonus replied that Athenius had acted on his own and that the Nabateans were indeed excused. So you have this battle. This is this time period here with Antigonus, and he sends in Athenius, and they are wiped out. There was actually 3 battles. I don't think I included all 3 of them. This was the first one, and they were wiped out in this battle by the Nabateans. And they were not, they were acting in self-defense. They were connected, the Nabateans were connected to Ishmael, the root cause of Islam. This leads or helps us review our understanding of the role of Islam at the end of the world, especially at Panium. How will Islam obstruct the United States in 2021 as the United States takes back the sphere of influence? And what does Islam look like? Revelation 9, the Woe Trumpets, gives us basic and impressive history of the role of Islam. We're not going to unlock every detail or symbol in Revelation 9, and that we recommend the Advent Pioneers, Uriah Smith and Daniel in the Revelation, and Josiah Litch's Prophetic Exposition, Volume 2, to understand the trumpets. So if we're to look into the line of the 144,000, we have our 5 main waymarks here, 1989, 9/11, Sunday Law, close of probation, and Second Coming. Between 9/11 and Sunday Law, we have 2019 and 2021. 2019 is an increase of knowledge, while 2021 is a formalization. Sunday Law is a test. To understand the increase of knowledge and formalization, we need to look at 9/11 and Sunday Law. At 9/11, we have the subject of Islam arriving into history. What we'll have is an increase of knowledge on the role of Islam and the nature of the Sunday Law, and that is what we would like to figure out. And I think we also talked about those presentations in Portugal that Elder Parmenter did on the Nashville quote, as well as 9T, and bringing those together and showing that those two are the same event. They're talking about the same event, and they're talking about a time when there is no more mercy, showing that it's after the close of probation, not at 9/11. And so what came from that study was that 9/11 is a harbinger that points to the close of probation. So I'm still trying to study and understand all that as what pertains to all this period of time here. But what they came to was that 9/11 is a harbinger that points to here.
I forget, what does the C stand for and the DD?
Not crying. This one here, you're looking
Death decree.
Okay. The C is the death decree?
that's the death decree.
Oh, I thought you said DD. I'm sorry.
No, I said both. I said both. The C and then the DD. So the DD is the death decree. Right, that makes sense. And the C is, what is that one? The C.
I don't know on that one. I don't know what he put that there for. So I'll have to ask if somebody knows what we're missing there, but I don't remember what the C was for. You got the loud cry. You know that there's increase in knowledge of formalization of a message, right? I don't know what he put that there for.
Is it supposed to symbolize that the cry increases slowly?
Maybe. That could be.
Well, I was wondering if it was Concord.
I don't. Yeah, I thought that first when she first asked that, but I don't think so. I think maybe it might be that the cry begins and then it swells to a loud cry.
Okay. Well, thank you both.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries. I just couldn't remember.
Yeah, I've gone through these notes several times, but I just didn't notice the C. So 1989 is the fulfillment of the 40th verse of Daniel 11. Daniel 11:40 gives us two historical fulfillments based on the current prophetic events. Part A, 1798, and Part B, 1989, respectively. In 1798, Daniel 8:14 was unsealed as the first angel's message in relation to time. In 1989, Daniel 11:40 to 45 was unsealed, a message connected to time, which was formalized in 1996 in the Time of the End magazine. That has been clarified recently. The nature of Sunday law, Justice Snow clarified the message given to Miller on 2300 days. 1989, 9/11, Sunday law, close of probation, and the second coming are 5 key primary waymarks in the line of the 144,000. So we have 4 dispensations with 2 waymarks in each dispensation. 2021 is the midnight cry, where we expect the arrival of Islam, just as it was on September 11th, 9/11. And this is where my question is, because this was a strike at 9/11, but the rise was in this period of time here. And so things that I'm still trying to look into and to understand, if this is a victory for the King of the North, that brings the rise of Islam. This brought and it's more in the House of Saud study, but when it comes to the Sunni and the Shia and the Wahhabis, and this puritanical, the Wahhabis were a puritanical religion, and it goes all the way back to wanting to maintain this puritanical religion. But that's what brings about this hatred of us being involved in the Middle East. But what I've been trying to understand and study through is, while the extreme puritanical sect is hating us, there are others that actually embrace our help. So there's a lot of complications in the Middle East, in understanding the Middle East.
There's a question. I thought that the connection between the King of the North and the papacy brought about the rise of Islam.
Say that again.
I thought that the connection between the King of the North and the papacy brought about the rise of Islam.
I don't know if I have a right answer for that, but what we can know from the structure and also from the literal history is that in the history of 1798, the papacy wasn't even involved in that fulfillment. So when you involve the papacy in it, that's from the structure that has been built in the movement by application. And so I don't know the role that the papacy plays in that. But right now, from this perspective, we're looking at just the role of the King of the North and the King of the South being the United States and Russia. Huh? Say that again. Okay, I thought somebody said something. Okay, so let's see. So we have 4 dispensations with two waymarks. 2021 is Midnight Cry, where we expect the arrival of Islam, just as it was on September 11th, 2001. Our burden is to figure out the nature of Islam in 2021. We'll look at the origin of Islam before we look at other lines that can help us to conceptualize 2021. In this series, we're going to look into the basic understanding of the origin of Islam. Before we look into that, we need to identify the context in which Islam became a subject of prophecy and why did it happen. So the place of Islam, and this is Josiah Litch, an Adventist pioneer, was and is an interesting figure in early course of Advent history, who joined Miller in the preaching of the second advent of Christ in 1844. He took an extensive exposition of Revelation 9 and Islam, Great Controversy 334, in connection with Daniel 11:40. God raised him from his strange understanding of the 1260 to an investigation of Revelation 9. He, Litch, was already well aware that the Protestant world generally believed that Antichrist, under the various prophetic symbols of Daniel, Paul, and John, was the papacy. And he knew that Protestants generally believed that this power was to continue for 1260 years or days, and that quite a few of these learned writers began the period with the decree of Focus, I think is how you say that, in 606 AD, and consequently would not terminate until 1866. To Litch, this evidence had seemed rather decisive. So we know that this is an inaccurate here, but Josiah Litch had an odd understanding and William Miller helped him. From nothing to something, Litch still realized that 606 AD remains an interesting date in regard to the rise of Islam after Miller convinced him that the 1260 period began in 538 and not as he used to believe. If we would turn our attention to the book of Daniel, chapter 2, 7, 8, and 11 chapters respectively, Daniel gives us 4 dispensations of the false king of the north. The 4th one is the kingdom of Rome, and Rome came in 2 phases. Rome 1, that's the Republic, and Rome 2, the dictator, the history of the 1260. Revelation 9 finds its historical context in the 2nd phase of Rome. So we see the 2 phases of Rome here, but he's also talking about the 4 dispensations, talking about Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and then Rome, and then this is Rome in its 2 phases. And we see the rise of Islam here after 538 AD. And this being identified as a dictatorship, this being identified as Rome, the Republic. The role of Islam, woe trumpet, entered the field of prophecy when Rome changed from a republic to a dictatorial form based on the testimony of Daniel. There are a couple of reasons to show that Rome equals the United States at the end of the world. One of them being the Sunday Edict of 321 AD and the 1888 history. I would like us to focus on the US transitioning from democratic constitutional republic to a dictatorship, the lamb-like or republic to a dragon dictatorial voice, and how Islam plays it. If we would compare and contrast US and Rome in regard to the subject under study, Islam arrives in the history of the dictatorship in both histories. In the study of the 2 ships from the book of Acts 27, we have the ship of Alexandria, the good ship, representing both the United States and the Seventh-day Adventist Church from 1798. And that's Daniel 11:40a. Adramyttium is the bad ship, which represents the United States from 1989, Daniel 11:40 part B, as it sails toward the Sunday law, when it will fully speak like a dragon.
Sister Elaine, is the Battle of Actium on this line that's being shown here, these 2 lines, is that Raphia on our line, and then 538 is Panium on our line, where we would see the rise of Islam?
I don't think I can answer that for you.
Okay.
I know I can't. I know what you're saying is laying this line over our line is what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm trying to see it in comparison to that because that would fit with
Because
this
they go-
model.
Yeah, because they go from a transition from a republic to a dictatorship.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I don't know that I've seen a line like that done in any of the studies. If that,
Okay.
but that's something to think about because you're right, because it goes from a republic to a dictatorship. And the dictatorship is what brings the rise of Islam.
Yeah. Good, thank you.
Somebody has a question.
Yes, I do. Can you hear me okay?
Uh-huh.
Okay. My question is, I have a really hard time understanding, so I'm just going to throw questions out there from this morning's study.
No problem.
From learning from this morning's study. But so my question is, at the last sentence, that it taught, oh, I think you switched the page, that it said, as it sails towards the Sunday law. So my question is what does that look like? And do we know when that's going to be? I might be behind on that understanding, but I'm just going to throw that question out there. When it fully speaks like a dragon.
The thing that helps me, because I am notorious for wanting to jump ahead. And I've been humbled many times myself and realizing that if I jump ahead, I'm going to miss what I need to know in the moment and in this dispensation.
Okay.
So I don't know if we know. I didn't mean that as an insult at all. I mean, I've had to tell myself, stay here, and then understand here. And that's a really hard thing for me to do because I'm used to just kind of looking all over the place. And the Lord is really trying to help zoom me in. So I don't know that we know fully what it looks like. We know that it involves the Constitution. Maybe somebody else has a good answer for that, but it involves the Constitution. When every principle of it is repudiated, and if that helps.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Definitely, it's a process of transition, which I think is interesting because you don't have the rise of Islam right here. It comes after. So the lamb-like horns and the dragon voice of the symbol point to a striking contradiction between the professions and the practice of the nation thus represented. The speaking of the nation is the action of its legislative and judicial authorities. By such action, it will give the lie to those liberal and peaceful principles which it has put forth as the foundation of its policy, and that's Great Controversy 442. So that helps somewhat with it. Although I think when in our studies now, we want to be more in on the micro look at things and understand more specifically instead of a broad way of what things look like. So they're good questions because I have them myself all the time. My big question is really, what does Islam look like at 2021? And when do they come in and destroy?
Sister Kathy is saying that it looks like the overthrow of the three branches of the U.S. government.
Yeah, she did a good study on that. She's more equipped on that one than I. So where he controls all three branches, correct? We will try to overlay the history of Acts 27 and Numbers 22 from 1989, the second last narrative of this discourse. What I want us to realize is that Islam enters into prophetic history as a scourge against a dictatorial administration of Rome and the USA at the end of the world. This can be well demonstrated with the rise of radical Islam since 1989, which is a milestone year that illustrates the rise of the US as a dictator ad remidium. So we know from Daniel and the Revelation, Uriah Smith writes that Islam was a false religion that was raised up to be a scourge against an apostate church. So we start with the Sunni and the Shia, two factions, plays an integral part in the role of Islam at the end of the world. The two tribes have been in dire conflict after the death of Muhammad, each faction believing that the successor of Muhammad came from each tribe. This is well demonstrated in the day and age conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran, among other Middle East countries like Iraq.
Can I ask a question about that really quick?
Uh-huh.
So I was able to watch the documentary yesterday on the Iraq invasion. I think it's called A Story About Iraq. I don't have the,
Yeah.
You know what I mean, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And throughout that document, when it came up after Al Qaeda, okay, so America done its thing, invaded, took down Saddam Hussein. Then Al Qaeda came into the picture and really started reaping revenge on the people. And then ISIS came in also reaping revenge on the people. So Iraq was never ever left with peace. And they've just been hurting all of this time. And they had talked about Sunni and Shia and how they fought each other. And they, on the panel, they had several people interviewed in this documentary. And there's a woman, an older woman in a black burqa, I guess that's what you call it, was really sad. And she was talking about how, I think she said the Sunni killed her uncle. And when that, I don't know if you've seen, yeah, I'm sure you've seen the document, but there was a young man who immigrated to Canada, but he left his family there in Iraq. He came back to Iraq to see his family after so many years, and then he wanted to have a reunion with some of his high school buddies. But one of his buddies did not want to have a reunion because one of the high school, another buddy, was a Sunni. And I guess this family was Shia, and I hope, maybe I got them backwards or mixed up, but that was it. There was an argument between Sunni and Shia. And so it makes me wonder, did they always have the separation of Sunni and Shia for hundreds of years, or is it just a recent thing? Because it sounds like when these guys were kids in high school, they were all friends, and it didn't matter who was Sunni and Shia, but only when they're adults and after all the war and carnage going on in Iraq, then it matters. Or am I missing something with my question?
No, it does go all the way back to the beginning, as it shows here, all the way back to Muhammad, because each faction, each tribe said that they were the true descendant or successor of Muhammad. But so it goes way back, but they didn't always have war. They got along with one another. And in several of those documentaries, I don't remember which one, I saw that one that you're talking about too, and that the one that went to Canada. In some of the other documentaries, it talks about how they used to live among one another and get along. It didn't matter. You choose this and you choose that. And it's been really an interesting study. I don't have it all understood yet, but it's been a really interesting study to watch it transform or transpire from getting along to not getting along and to all out war. But it's us being involved there, and the hatred of the puritanical ones, which are from the Sunni side, and even further, and we'll see it in the House of Saud study, perhaps if we get that next week, going back to the beginning of Wahhabism is a sect from, it's a union that when the House of Saud first was rising about, they made an agreement with Wahhab, I believe was his name, and this was an agreement that they had come into because they wanted to get back territory from the Ottoman Empire. And I don't have those notes in front of me, so I don't want to misquote anything, but so it seems from what I've been seeing is when they make an agreement, like for instance, the government, the Saudi Arabia government makes an agreement for at a specific time for a specific need. They make an agreement with these Wahhabi Sunnis, these puritanical ones, what seems to happen is then and you see this in several of the videos, that the Wahhabis then want to, you've got now a church religion, a state church society, church and state union, where the church is actually controlling the state. And the church is now, these puritanical ones are now dictating this puritanical religion on people. And that gave rise to this animosity, this puritanical sect. And I'm sure there's a lot more to it, but that's part of what I've been kind of coming to understand, is that that puritanical sect is where the problems come in. And you have Saudi Arabia that also comes into an agreement and accepts help and works with, in joint effort with the United States in their battles. Then you have now these puritanical ones don't want the United States in there. And the reason, from what I've been understanding, is they don't want to live like the Western world. They want to go back to this purity and get rid of all, bigger than secularism. They don't want all the technology. They don't want all that there. They want to go back to that puritanical life where you're not infected by all the trappings of Western society. So when Saudi Arabia meets with the United States and makes an agreement, then the puritanical ones, what they start to witness is Western society coming in and people wanting Western society and loving it and embracing it. And pretty soon they all want democracy, and that's just stripping away from what they want. So that's a short summary of what I've been kind of putting together. And I don't know if that helped. So they haven't always fought. They get along at times. They have gotten along at times.
Thank you.
Elaine,
Yeah.
do you see the hands up or not?
I did see that there was a hand up.
Okay, because I thought I heard earlier that you
It's
couldn't
not
see
there
it.
now. I could see the hand go up, but it's not there now. So I think somebody pulled it away, and I forgot that somebody did raise a hand.
What? I see two. I see iPhone and Adriana.
Oh, that
okay.
I can't see. I only saw a little notification.
Okay, iPhone just pulled off, but Adriana, okay, sorry. I didn't know because in the previous presentation, but I guess since you're the presenter now, you can see those things. That's all. I just want to let you know hands were up.
I don't always see them. It was a notification that popped up, but I can't read the chat, and I don't have the screen I can't show the screen that shows who's there and the hand up. It was just a notification. So
Adriana has her hand up.
Okay, go ahead, Adriana.
I just wanted to say one thing, Allie, in that video, Once Upon a Time in Iraq, it goes to explain why they ended up being Sunnis and Shias so pitted against each other. And it was because Al-Qaeda, under the leadership of Zarqawi, he made specific actions to destroy one sect, to wake up the other sect against them. And he basically created, they were living side by side in relative peace for that, time and situation. But he came up with this idea to pit the two tribes against each other and create this sectarian war. And so then Zarqawi went down, but that guy Abu Bakr came in, and he came in with ISIS. And so it just kept getting pushed to radicalization in either direction because of all.
And even bin Laden himself denounced what Zarqawi did because he didn't agree with killing fellow Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
But she's right in how they said that is in the Syrian war, where prior to the Syrian war, he wanted to bring about that animosity within the region.
Okay, thank you for bringing that up, Sister Adriana, because I remember that in the film, but that's the part I was missing, that missing link, and you just made it more, like you explained it to me what I missed in the film. So thank you, got that.
There's like so many points that you can wander off on to try to, that's what I've been learning.
May I, ooh, sorry, may I ask something?
Yeah.
So simplistically, Sunni would be the most conservative sect and Shia would be the more liberal sect. But the part that still is kind of puzzling me is that Saddam Hussein was Sunni. And I thought, and Sunni is with Saudi Arabia, tied to Saudi Arabia. And so if the United States goes in to take out Saddam Hussein, who is Sunni, aren't they then fighting against themselves? I don't know if I'm making my question, what's puzzling me straight, but it seems that that Saddam Hussein, if he's Sunni, would be on the side that the United States supports, since they support Saudi Arabia, which is Sunni. Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
Yes, totally. Because like I said, there's so many, I don't want to say tentacles, that you could go out in this study to try to understand them. And I've been really trying to dig into that for the last month to understand. There's a documentary that I haven't watched yet that I saw pop up on the feed. It's a documentary on Saddam Hussein, because I have that question too when it comes to that, because Saudi Arabia actually was, if I remember correctly, they were united in what they were doing in taking out Saddam Hussein, if I remember correctly. So it's really hard to understand and get our bearings around who's who and why they support and what they support. It's very complicated, and for me anyway, it's very complicated. But yes, he's Sunni, and they took him out. And but I think it had to do more with the Ba'athist Party as opposed to being Sunni. But that also helped spark the Iran and the Shias against within Iraq.
I have a comment. There's a video that Sister Tess did, and it's called Protestantism Divided. It's just one of the recent ones, I think, in Australia. And she talks about the Sunni and the differences between Sunni and Shia, and she compares the two between Catholicism and Protestantism.
Yes.
Catholicism being more liberal, Protestantism, and mainly the Protestantism of the religious right, which would be Sunni.
Right.
So, that's a really kind of makes it easier to understand when she put it in that kind of comparison.
Yes.
And but she also said that the House of Saud, they're not a religious family. They're just but they're using these religious cleric type movement so that they can justify their power over Mecca and Medina. So I would encourage, it's really good. I'm just doing some transcribing in that, but if you guys want to understand it a little bit better, she really does a real good understanding of it.
Thank you.
It's pretty interesting.
It helps us when we can put it in terms of what we can see.
Yeah.
From our standpoint, from here in the United States, to be able to put it into, because that's
what she does. She does, because then as soon as she said it's like the two factions of Protestantism,
yes,
you could totally understand it. Because so the Sunni is the religious right. They're intolerable. They want everything. They want, Sharia law. I mean, it's church and state today.
Yes,
so we can see that see the chaos that they have. That's church and state. That's what happens.
And it's interesting to see how, like I was saying, that the Saudi government goes to them when they have something that they want. And so what I'm kind of beginning to understand is they have a role as well when it comes to not just the US being over there and us being hated, but they play a role as well. It's like, there's a fine line that everybody has to walk. But in the foreign minister, I can't remember his name. He's in the Bitter Rivals. He talks about the mistakes that they had made, and the interview guy from Frontline is saying, well, we really appreciate hearing that, because you hear that you guys take some responsibility for this. And he mentions how I don't know if he used the word hindsight, maybe he used hindsight, but it's just what I've been kind of witnessing is it seems like everybody does what's best for each one of them at the time. And at the time, that's what seems best. And then out of that, we have this big mess. And I know I saw the hand raise thing go up again, but I don't know who it is.
I think it's Richard.
Okay. Yeah, I had after I gained my PhD in Islamic studies last night, after watching 2 hours of videos on YouTube, I learned a few things, and it was interesting. They brought out a point that the sister was talking about earlier about how taking out of Saddam Hussein, kind of hurt the United States. And from what they were saying on Bitter Rivals, it was that the United States didn't understand the relationships that the Shia and the Sunnis had. And by them taking out Saddam Hussein, which the Sunnis wanted to get rid of him in a different way. They didn't want to cause a vacuum in Iraq. But because the United States did kill him, that Iran kind of came in and, took over with their, liberalism, and that kind of incited there was no buffer between Saudi Arabia and Iran anymore. So I thought that was interesting because I had no idea about that. So,
like I said, there's so many different avenues to learn, and the House of Saud is a really interesting one of the rise of them. But there's so many different factions of what goes on. But yeah, when we took out Saddam Hussein, that brought the Shiites of Iran and the Shiites that are in Iraq to go in and want to try to fill that vacuum. And sparking about, they've been in battles for like 17 years, I think is what the videos have been saying, because of all of this. So, and it's terrible life.
2003.
Yeah. And it's being traced back to, to many things, but being traced back to the oil. Oil's a big part of it. So we've got the origin of Islam, 570 AD, near the close of the 6th century. There was born in Mecca of the princes of Arabia a man who claimed direct descent from Ishmael, the son of Abraham. This man was Muhammad, the son of Abdallah, and the founder of a faith which today has many thousand adherents. Arabia says Gibbon was free. The adjacent kingdoms were shaken by the storms of conquest and tyranny, and persecuted sects fled to the Happy Land, where they might profess what they believed and practice what they professed. In Arabia were gathered at this time Christians, Jews, Persian fire worshippers, and representatives of all sects and beliefs. Muhammad was acquainted with them all as he mingled in the thoroughfares of Mecca and in his journeyings to Damascus and seaports of Syria. So Mecca is right in here where Muhammad was born. And we've got up here Israel, and then up here Syria. But there were people that came, if I'm understanding that passage, that they were looking as the Happy Land, that they could go and practice, believe what they want and practice according to their beliefs. And it's in that setting that Muhammad is raised up. And it's interesting because what you're seeing here is there's many different beliefs, which takes me back to when I first bought my first Bible and was not even a praying person, and said, I don't know how there can be so many different beliefs and only one God. So it's no new thing under the sun that people are seeing that there are many different beliefs. And I never thought that it was possible that there'd be multiple beliefs if there's only one God. So that's a setting that he's under. So born approximately 570. Again, like I said, there's many different places you can go in this study. This is some Wikipedia information, like the Year of the Elephant. Sounds like something to look up. So I look up a lot of these, but not all of them. But it's something that each piece will lead us to more information to help us to understand as we're trying to understand the role of Islam. So he was born approximately 570 CE, the year of the elephant, in the Arabian city of Mecca. Muhammad was orphaned at the age of 6. He was raised under the care of his paternal grandfather, and upon his death by his uncle. In later years, he would periodically seclude himself in a mountain cave named Hira for several nights of prayer. When he was 40, Muhammad reported being visited by Gabriel in the cave and receiving his first revelation from God. I also thought it was interesting that he's 40 when we know that the priests are actually 30 when they're of age. And it's just interesting that he was 40 and receiving his first revelation from God. 3 days later in 610, Muhammad started preaching these revelations publicly and proclaiming that God is one, that complete submission, Islam, to God is the right way of life, and that he was a prophet and a messenger of God, similar to other prophets in Islam. Muhammad died June 8, 632 in Medina, founder of Islam and the proclaimer of the Quran. Muhammad is traditionally said to have been born 570. So that's pretty much just a repeat, another resource there on him. So in 606 AD, Muhammad began to have a series of visions. He claims to have been called by God to be a prophet, while the Persian monarch contemplated the wonders of his art and power. He received an epistle from an obscure citizen of Mecca, inviting him to acknowledge Muhammad as the apostle of God. He rejected the invitation and tore the epistle. It is thus, explained the Arabian prophet, that God will tear the kingdom and reject the supplication of Khosrows. That was Prophetic Expositions, Volume 2. In 610 AD, praying in the cave of darkness, his first revelation. Muhammad's revelation was an event described in Islam as taking place in 610 AD, during which the Islamic prophet Muhammad was visited by the archangel known as Gabriel in English, who revealed to him the beginnings of what would later become the Quran. The event took place in a cave called Hira, located on the mountain Jabal an-Nur near Mecca. As for the exact date of this event, it has been calculated to be on Friday, the 17th of Ramadan at night, August 6, 610 CE, when Muhammad was 40 lunar years, 6 months and 12 days of age, 39 on the Gregorian calendar. Muhammad was of a serious mind, and it was his custom to retire 1 month each year to a cave a few miles from Mecca, where he gave himself to fasting and prayer. On his return from one of these seasons of seclusion, he announced his belief in one God and that Muhammad was the prophet of God. This was the beginning of Islamism. The prophet first taught in his own family and gradually gained a number of converts. I don't think it's in this study, but some of the stuff that I've been looking at, when it comes to the Wahhabis, maybe I'll save that for another study to make sure that we get that straight. But going back all the way to Muhammad, there's a sect today that are of the teachers and the educated ones of Islam. They study from that which not just Muhammad, but then the next generation and the next generation of each of those that had actually studied under Muhammad. I can't remember that. I think it was called Salib. I might have that wrong, but we'll cover that in the House of Saud later. But they carried that from the time of Muhammad. Just like, for me, to put it in perspective, like Sister Donna was bringing out, put it in perspective what we see here and what we're familiar with here is, if you're, say, born and raised in Adventism, you have that beginning stage and you carry it, somebody's going to carry that light all the way through. Just the same as the light of all the way back to Adam and Eve, somebody's going to carry that light all the way through. So Muhammad, within Muhammad, there were those in this first and second generation that that always carried that light, and they go on to be the teachers and the instructors. And that's what's then going into, after 9/11, I think, no, prior to 9/11, prior to 1989, when bin Laden is being raised up, based on an agreement that in a use that Saudi Arabia, the government seemed to have with Wahhabism, that the Wahhabis wound up being the school, and it's Salid, I think is how the word is, but I don't remember it, but they became the schools and the educators of just as if you were all going we're all going to school, that's what they went to. And that school taught them this puritanical Wahhabism. And out of that, and it's teaching to hate Christians, teaching to hate the Shias, teaching to hate Western ways of life. And that's what they're literally raised with. It's within the school. And that's what raised up bin Laden and many others, is just is that education process. By having those strict puritanical Sunnis over the education system. So
would they be like the far right, the extreme right? Or?
Yeah.
And regular, just being a Sunni would just be a regular conservative.
I think so. And what they want is no westernization. And that goes back to when we did the study on Napoleon and the Egyptian expedition, where they brought westernization and modernization into Arabia. And again, if you picture yourself in your own life, living in this very secluded, isolated, structured life, and then in comes all this different way of life, TV, for instance, and various foods, and alcohol, the various things that you see. I bring up alcohol because he brings it up in one of those videos. And so when you start bringing all this in, it's a threat to this puritanical sect of Sunnism. And so, yeah, they want to fight against and keep that out. And it's built within the education system, from what I understand.
Have you seen anything about the Uyghurs?
I haven't heard that before.
It's spelled Y-U, I think, G-H-E-R-S, and it's pronounced Uyghur. And they are Muslims in China. I don't know a lot about them yet, but their facial features, I guess, have a distinct look. And in China, they have all that spying equipment in place. You know, the cameras and everything in place. They have the most high-tech spying system there is, and they've made the Uyghurs have special identity cards so that they can't go in or out anywhere within China without presenting that card. And they have barcode papers with barcodes taped to their doors of their residences if they're Uyghurs, and the police go by and scan that barcode, and it tells every single thing about that particular group of people, right, living in that residence, and who's there and who should be there and who shouldn't be there. And they've begun arresting them and putting them in concentration camps, and nobody can talk to them, and they're trying to re-educate them in like a really horrible fashion. But they are a type of Islamic group too. And something I watched, the Lord led me to retread my steps, because in April of last year, we studied so much to become baptized, but I missed a lot of foundational classes due to the changes that took place for me personally when I, after baptism, you know, and lost my job and was banned from the church, and then was brought here to take care of my mom and didn't have internet for a while. And so I got behind, and the Lord led me to watch some presentations that tested around that time that all that fell apart for me. And it's clearing up some points for me that wow, it's really helping me a lot. And she brought up that China is a subject of Bible prophecy, but now there's this new group to also reckon with, these Uyghurs. I don't know how they fit in, but I just thought I would add that.
I wrote it down and I'll look it up.
Yeah,
there's a lot of different things that they're doing with that, putting them in the camp. Because I was reading different articles, and some of them even say as much as they're selling body parts and things like that. So they're being very, very cruel to these people. There's a lot of different things they're doing to them.
It's not just them though. China's been doing these re-education or what is it? They consider it like they're taking you out of the delusion of religion. And it's not just Muslims. It's a big part of it is the Muslim population, but there's also Christians and other religions in there. Yeah. And they have like these little campuses where they basically manipulate your mind to kind of get you out of to basically be a China loyalist. And
like a deprogramming.
Yeah, deprogramming and reprogramming to look at the Chinese government as God and all that kind of thing. It's pretty scary and pretty messed up, but China has, I mean, it's just that a place where, I mean, the government well, it's just that government system. There's a lot of people there who hate it.
Right.
And want to fight against it, but because of how much surveillance they have, it's almost impossible. And like in Hong Kong, the people who were protesting had to wear face coverings because they could, you know, spot them and then arrest them later because of all the surveillance they have. So it's just a lot of taking away of human rights. Yeah, like Christine said.
Okay. So there's what, you know, when Elder Tess was during the camp meeting last week talking about being multidimensional, it's like it's multidimensional in every one of these topics that we look at, and including Islam. I don't know if that's a safe way to say it, but that's the way it seems to me. It's very multidimensional, and try to understand what all is happening simultaneously. For all of this. So to promulgate the holy religion of Islam to all Arab tribes and all over the world, God commanded the holy prophet to openly declare his prophetic mission and explain to the masses the truth of his faith. So he made his way to Mount Safa, stood on a high place and exclaimed, Ya Saba, who his voice resounded on the mountain and attracted the attention of the people. Large crowds from various tribes hurried toward him to hear what he was going to say. The holy prophet turned to them and said, O people, will you believe me if I tell you that your enemies intend to ambush you at dawn or at night? And they all answered, we have not heard a lie from you throughout your life. So they would believe him. Just another map to get through the spread of Islam here. And we'll go through more details along the way. But we see down here Yemen and Oman. This is Mecca where he was born, and he goes and we'll see to Medina, and it's Medina where he dies. And the Hijaz is this area here where Mecca and Medina are. And yes, I think somebody mentioned that Saudi Arabia is are the keepers of these two holy sites, which puts them in prominence and a significant light of all the interactions of what goes on in this whole Muslim region here. So anyway, so that's the spread under Islamic world under Muhammad, 622 to 632, and then the territory added by the first 4 caliphs. There was also some presentations I was listening to yesterday. It's hard when I'm listening while I'm working when they do a lot of translating, or the, what do you call it, the subtitles, because you have to watch to be able to do that. So I missed a lot of points, but there were some videos. You could probably search them out on YouTube. I think I saved them if anybody wants to see them, but it's I think it was called The Caliph. And then there was part 1, 2, and 3. I got through up to part 2 to understand the Caliph. And it's just interesting to see that they constantly have interactions and battles within. There may be times of peace, but there's always battles from within. The Hegira flees from Mecca to Medina, opposition. His flight from Mecca, called the Hegira, if I'm saying that right, in 622, is the era of his glory and the date from which the Mohammedans compute their time. In opposition to the forms and ceremonies of the numerous worshippers who congregated at Mecca and to professed Christians who revered the images of saints and martyrs, the simple principles of the new religious leader called for prayer, fasting, and alms. 5 times a day, his followers all over the world turn their eyes toward Mecca and lift their hearts in prayer. When Muhammad entered Medina and was first in 622, was first received as its prince, a turban was unfurled before him to supply the deficiency of a standard. The turbans of the Saracens, like unto a coronet, were their ornament and their boast. The rich booty abundantly supplied and frequently renewed them. To assume the turban is proverbially to turn Muslim, and the Arabs were anciently distinguished by the mitres which they wore.
On that part, are they saying that Muhammad put on the turban?
Say that again.
Are they saying on that part 18, the last paragraph, are they saying that Muhammad put on the turban so that like a symbolic, some type of symbolic meaning, saying that he was
Muslim?
A Muslim, yeah. Is that what it's saying? Did he put on a turban, basically what I'm asking?
Yeah, they gave him, he was first received as its prince. A turban was unfurled before him.
Oh, okay.
They gave him, they put it on him.
Okay, that makes sense. I misread it. Okay, thank you.
And to assume the turban is to be a Muslim.
Right, understood. Thank you.
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
The turban was used as a standard, which is a flag.
Yes.
So, okay, that's what I'm understanding.
Yeah, because it did say that let's see.
We're here.
Efficiency of a standard, which would be a flag.
Okay. Also, they have different colors for different meanings. Kind of like which one can shoot further, you know, different things like that. The colors mean things.
Yeah. So yes, the turban was basically as if putting on the flag of that you're a Muslim. So he travels from Mecca to Medina. So there's a 628 a treaty, the Meccans and the Muslims. The Pact of Al-Hudaybiyah compromise that was reached between Muhammad and Meccan leaders, in which Mecca gave political and religious recognition to the growing community of Muslims in Medina. Muhammad had been approaching Mecca with approximately 1,400 followers in order to perform the Umrah, or pilgrimage, as directed in a dream. The Meccans, however, humiliated by their inability to besiege Medina in March 627, would not allow Muhammad entry into their city. Instead, a Meccan delegation met the Muslims at their stopping place, Al-Hudaybiyah, situated about 9 miles outside Mecca, to negotiate a treaty, thereby acknowledging the equality of the Muslims as bargaining partners. A 10-year truce was declared. Muhammad then agreed to abandon his Umrah, his pilgrimage, on the condition that he be allowed to enter Mecca the following year, at which time the city would be emptied for 3 days to allow the Muslims to perform their rites. In addition, provision was made for the return of any Meccan who might flee to Medina without permission from his guardian, although a similar provision for Muslims going to Mecca was not stipulated. Finally, the various tribes could ally themselves with either the Meccans or the Muslims as they wished. So this is the early days of spreading this new religion. Muhammad, 629, Muhammad attacks the Romans, the Muslim conquest 629 to 718. According to Muslim biographies, Muhammad, having received intelligence that the Byzantine forces were concentrating in northern Arabia with intentions of invading Arabia, led a Muslim army north to Tabuk in present-day northwestern Saudi Arabia with the intention of preemptively engaging the Byzantine army. The news, however, proved to be false as the Byzantine army had retreated beforehand. Though it was not a battle in a typical sense, nevertheless, the event represented the first Arab assault against the I don't know if it's Byzantine or Byzantine, right? Byzantine. It did not, however, lead immediately to a military confrontation. However, there is no contemporary Byzantine account of the Tabuk expedition, and many of the details come from much later Muslim sources. It had been argued that there is no one Byzantine source possibly referencing the Battle of Mu'tah, traditionally dated 629, but this is not certain. The first engagements may have started as conflicts with the Arab client states of the Byzantine and Sassanid empires, the Ghassanids and the Lakhmids and Al-Hira. In any case, Muslim Arabs after 634 certainly pursued a full-blown offensive against both empires, resulting in the conquest of the Levant, Egypt, and Persia for Islam. The most successful Arab generals were Khalid ibn al-Walid and Arma. I'm not sure on how that one. Anyway, so these are dating their first battles with Rome. And keeping in mind we have 538 and then this dictatorial Rome set up, and then comes Muhammad, and now you have these battles and attacks on Rome. The conquest of Mecca, 630 and then 632, the death of Muhammad. After the death of Muhammad, he was succeeded in the command by Abu Bakr, AD 632, who as soon as he had fairly established his authority and government, dispatched a circular letter to the Arabian tribes, of which the following is an extract. This is to acquaint you that I intend to send the true believers into Syria to take it out of the hand of the infidels, and I would have you know that the fighting for religion is an act of obedience to God. So as noted before, the two prominent Arabian tribes that are playing a significant role in Islam in our day and age are Sunni and Shia. They've been in conflict with each other over the succession of Muhammad. I recommend that we watch some interesting PBS Frontline videos, which we've all been talking about, and there's Bitter Rivals, and the link is in there if anybody has not yet watched Bitter Rivals. I think it's about 3 hours worth of video. One of them was 2 hours and one was an hour, right around there. But they were very helpful. Also, there's one called The Crown Prince, and then the one that I've been watching recently is The House of Saud. So the woe trumpets and their applications. The first woe, July 27th, 1299 to July 27th, 1449, that's the 150 years or the 5 months. And then from July 27th, 1449 to August 11th, 1840, that's the 391 years and 15 days. And we know that this is where the seventh trumpet began to sound. The sixth trumpet ended and the seventh trumpet began to sound, and sounds all the way till the end. And just to reference that the trumpet is how do I say it right? The woe is a portion of the trumpet, but not the entire trumpet period. If we were to draw the lines of the priests from the 144,000, you'd have plowing, former rain, latter rain, and harvest. 1989, 9/11, 2014, we have Raphia and Panium. We're going to use the principle of natural spiritual compare and contrast from the history or the beginning of the first woe, Revelation 9:12, and the second woe, Revelation 11:14, respectively, and see what the third woe teaches us. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
There's a hand up. Brother Richard has a hand up.
Oh, that's from earlier. I'm sorry. Our Lord.
Okay. So 606 AD, he's marking as 1989, Revelation 9:1-3. A star fell from heaven from the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. While the Persian monarch contemplated the wonders of this art power, he received an epistle from an obscure citizen of Mecca, inviting him to acknowledge Muhammad as the apostle of God. He rejected the invitation and tore the epistle. It is thus exclaimed the Arabian prophet that God will tear the kingdom and reject the supplication of Khosroes. Placed on the verge of these two empires of the East, Muhammad observed with secret joy the progress of mutual destruction. And in the midst of the Persian triumphs, he ventured to foretell that before many years should elapse, victory should again return to the banners of the Romans. At the time when this prediction is said to have been delivered, no prophecy could be more distant from its accomplishment, since the first 12 years of Heraclius announced the approaching dissolution of the empire. And that's the Josiah Lich. Since the days of Scipio and Hannibal, no bolder enterprise has been attempted than that which Heraclius achieved for the deliverance of the empire. He permitted the Persians to oppress for a while the provinces and to insult with impunity the capital of the East, while the Roman emperor explored his perilous way through the Black Sea and the mountains of Armenia, penetrated into the heart of Persia, and recalled the armies of the great king to the defense of their bleeding country. The revenge and ambition of Khosroes exhausted his kingdom. The whole city of Constantinople was invested, and the inhabitants decried with terror the flaming signals of the European and Asiatic shores. In the Battle of Nineveh, which was fiercely fought from daybreak to the 11th hour, 28 standards, besides those which might be broken or torn, were taken from the Persians. The greatest part of their army was cut in pieces, and the victors, concealing their own loss, passed the night on the field. The cities and palaces of Assyria were opened for the first time to the Romans. So this was the key that unlocked this Battle of Nineveh, is the key that unlocked and opened up the way for them to spread. And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth. And to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, he fell into the earth. When the strength of the Roman Empire was exhausted, and the great king of the East lay dead in the tower of darkness, the pillage of an obscure town on the borders of Syria was the prelude of a mighty revolution. The robbers were the apostles of Muhammad, and their fanatic valor emerged from the desert. So this battle was the key that unlocked and opened the way for Islam to go and spread and to start attacking the Romans. 606, as seen on the 1850 chart, marks the rise of Muhammad. The key, Revelation 9:1, that unlocked the ladder in 606 AD to 627. Is the Battle of Nineveh, and that's 627, between two antagonists, Eastern Rome, Heraclius, and Persia, which is Khosroes. Two powers, especially the Persians, were a blockade to the rise. Does somebody have a question? No? The two powers, especially the Persians, were a blockade to the rise of Muhammad and his teachings. At the Battle of Nineveh, the two parties were exhausted and they became a key for the rise of Muhammad. That brings us to the history of 1989 that marks the rise of radical Islam. Prior to 1989, we had constant proxy war between Russia and the United States from 1979 and the Soviet-Afghan War. Rome and Persia were the key that marked the rise of Muhammad into power, which parallels the United States and Russia in the rise of radical Islam from 1989, and that was Al-Qaeda. We also have the Iranian Revolution in 1979 and the rise of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Another map just showing the battle of, this one was the Battle of Nineveh, and then they're spread as they come in. Okay. So the Iranian Revolution, also known as the Islamic Revolution or the 1979 Revolution, was a series of events that involved the overthrow of the last monarch of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, and the replacement of his government with an Islamic Republic under the Grand Ayatollah Khomeini, who was supported by the United States and was a leader of one of the factions in the revolt. The movement against the United States-backed monarchy was supported by various leftist and Islamist organizations and student movements. Demonstrations against the Shah commenced in October 1977, developing into a campaign of civil resistance that included both secular and religious elements, and which intensified in January of 1978. Between August and December of '78, strikes and demonstrations paralyzed the country. The Shah left Iran for exile on the 16th of January 1979 as the last Persian monarch, leaving his duties to a regency counselor and Shapur Bakhtiyar, who was an opposition-based prime minister. The Ayatollah Khomeini was invited back to Iran by the government and returned to Tehran to a greeting by several million Iranians. The royal reign collapsed shortly after the 11th of February when guerrillas and rebel troops overwhelmed troops loyal to the Shah in armed street fighting, bringing Khomeini to official power. Iran voted by national referendum to become an Islamic Republic on the 1st of April 1979 and to formulate and approve a new theocratic republican constitution, whereby Khomeini became supreme leader of the country in December. So we have the Shah of Iran and then Ayatollah Khomeini. And I want to back through that. So as to maybe somebody followed that better than I did, but I don't remember all these details, but who back to the Iranian Revolution, also known as the Islamic, was a series of events that involved the overthrow of the last monarch and the replacement of his government with an Islamic Republic. Okay, in the Islamic Republic, if I'm following that correctly, because I know I had to read this several times when I was going through these notes before. So the Islamic Republic is supported by the United States. Is that correct? The way you guys are reading that?
It says who was supported by the United States.
Yeah, so not the Shah of Iran, because I know there's stuff later with
Right.
Carter.
Yes, Khomeini. I'll
Yeah,
wait
I
for you to
agree.
talk. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Somebody got something.
Oh no, I was just saying at one point the United States was backing Khomeini. How do you say his name?
Okay. Yeah, I told him. Okay. Yes. Okay. So we also had the Iran-Iraq War in 1980, whose root is dated back in '79 over tension in the Persian Gulf. In that war, Iraq was also supported by Kuwait. The Iran-Iraq War began the 22nd of September 1980 when Iraq invaded Iran. It had ended the 20th of August in 1988 when Iran accepted the UN-brokered ceasefire. Iraq wanted to replace Iran as the dominant Persian Gulf state and was worried the 79 Iranian Revolution would lead Iraq's Shiite majority to rebel against the Ba'athist government. So keep them in mind, who's who. The Shiite would, from our perspective, be your liberal sect, so to speak, but the Ba'athists, that's where Saddam Hussein comes from, and they're Sunni. The war also followed a long history of border disputes, and Iraq planned to annex the oil-rich Khuzestan province and the east bank of the Arvand Rud, or Shat al-Arab. Although Iraq hoped to take advantage of Iran's post-revolutionary chaos, it made limited progress and was quickly repelled. Iran regained virtually all lost territory by June 1982. For the next 6 years, Iran was on the offensive until near the end of the war. There were a number of proxy forces, most notably the People's Mujahideen of Iran, siding with Iraq, the Iraqi Kurdish militias of the KDP and PUK siding with Iran. The United States, Britain, the Soviet Union, France, and most Arab countries provided political and logistic support for Iraq, while Iran was largely isolated. So, unlike what we saw with Saddam Hussein, most everybody's supporting Iraq at this time. During the Iran-Iraq War, Kuwait had financed Iraq, which Kuwait in 1989 was demanding to be paid, but Iraq refused to pay because it felt that the financial support of war was a corporate subject and Kuwait should not demand it. In early 1990, Iraq was accusing Kuwait of stealing Iraqi petroleum through slant drilling, although some Iraqi sources indicated Saddam Hussein's decision to attack Kuwait was made a few months before the actual invasion. Some feel there were several reasons for the Iraqi move, including Iraq's inability to pay the more than 14 billion US dollars that it had borrowed to finance the Iran-Iraq war, and Kuwait's high petroleum production levels, which kept revenues down for Iraq. So Iraq, let's see, Kuwait financed the Iraq war. And Iraq wants, let's see, was demanding to be paid, and Iraq refused to pay. So Iraq refuses to pay for the help that they supported with. We're trying to lead up to here. We have Iraq, trying to get familiar again with our geography, and Iran, and this being Saudi Arabia, Syria over here. And Kuwait, down here. The relation between Russia and Iraq by this time was strong, while Kuwait was an ally to the US. When Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, the US responded by attacking Iraq in 1991, when this sparked the rise of the terrorist group Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda began as a logistical network to support Muslims fighting against the Soviet Union during the Afghan War. Members were recruited through the Islamic world. When the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan in 1989, the organization dispersed, but continued to oppose what its leaders considered corrupt Islamic regimes and foreign, i.e. US, presence in Islamic lands. Based in Sudan for a period in the early 1990s, the group eventually reestablished its headquarters in Afghanistan under the patronage of the Taliban militia. The end of the Cold War between Russia and the United States in 1989 and 91, respectively, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, led to the rise of radical Islam. From 1989, America began acting as a unilateral or dictatorship instead of multilateral, and that led to the rise of Al-Qaeda that attacked the United States on 9/11. Is everybody following? It's a lot of history again.
I'm trying. It's a lot of info though.
It is.
I'll probably have to listen to this all over again and read along with it because I'm actually not following as quickly as you're moving. But
A lot of those videos are really helpful. And plus, I've been reading a lot of documents on this history to try to better understand it. But I think what's complicated again is because it is multidimensional. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but there's all these different things that are happening at once. And everybody seems to do what they think is right at that time. But the Soviet Union, and I know in some of the videos it talks about this, when the Soviet Union comes in, none of them want the Soviet Union in there because they don't want to bring in communism. So maybe Sister Adriana can help with that just a little bit. But they don't want, and they use that, if I understood correctly, they use that as an argument in one of the, when some of the battles that take place going forward, that they're doing what they're doing to try to keep the Soviet Union out. But the Soviet Union has its own designs as well that is not covered in this study, but the Soviet Union also wants access to the Middle East. And again, it goes back to the oil and an agreement that the US made early on with the Saudis when it came to oil. And who is going to supply the oil to Europe? So the Soviet Union wants access to the Middle East as well, and access as well to warm water ports, which they do not have access to where they're at. And I think I included it in the previous study that we did that when Peter the Great died, he left in his will that for Russia leaders to always pursue the Middle East and all the way down into India. And that when they can do that, they could rule the world. So this territory, the Middle East, is this central pivotal area always. And in this proxy war that we're seeing, it's a continuous proxy war between two superpowers. And during the Cold War, Russia was trying to get into the Middle East. And when they came into Afghanistan, then the US came in and helped to push out the Soviet Union from trying to do in the Middle East what they did in the Soviet Union. And it's in this, and going back as well to what I was saying about bin Laden and the education system prior to, where the Wahhabism and the I can't remember the word for them, but the educators, the educated ones that would be the education system for more than just Arabia, but how the education system would be based on this, would be not based on, but would be led by this puritanical sect. And that's what gave rise, that radical education gave rise to bin Laden and all these factors that become involved. And they're literally just trying to fight for their puritanical beliefs, but their puritanical beliefs call for killing Christians and killing Shiites and killing and getting rid of Western society and anything that threatens it. After the death of Muhammad, he was succeeded in the command by Abu Bakr, 8632, who, as soon as he had fairly established his authority and government, dispatched a circular letter to the Arabian tribes, of which the following is an extract. This is to acquaint you that I intend to send the true believers into Syria to take it out of the hand of the infidels, and I would have you know that the fighting for religion is an act of obedience to God. So this is what they actually believe, that the fighting for religion is an obedience to God, and taking Syria out of the control, out of the hands of the infidels. Syria is that of all the Middle East, Syria seems to be the, I don't know the words to put it into, but the I don't know, most important, but the pivotal spot that everyone wants. And that's what they've been battling with all the way through as we've gone through Daniel 11. They're always battling over control of Syria. Syria gives them access to the east and access to the west. So July 27, 1299, he's marking as 9/11, being after the death of Muhammad. And this is when you have Islam strike at 9/11 here. It was on July 27th, AD 1299, says given that Othman first invaded the territory of Nicomedia, and the singular accuracy of the date seems to disclose some foresight of the rapid and destructive growth of the monster. More than human foresight recorded this date with such definiteness. To the prophet on Patmos, it had been revealed that their power was to hurt men 5 months. So he's marking 606, the birth of Muhammad here. He's marking the beginning of the first woe at 9/11. And back here you have the Iranian Revolution and the Iraq-Iran War. Then you have the Afghan War. And during all this time, previous to this time, you have in, I don't know if it's just Arabia, but you have this puritanical sect that is the educational system. Kind of like what you were saying about China. They're raising them up to be what they wind up becoming. So his messengers returned with the tidings of pious and martial ardor, which they had kindled in every province. The camp of Medina was successfully filled with the intrepid bands of the Saracens, who panted for action, complained of the heat of the season and the scarcity of provisions, and accused with impatient murmurs the delays of the Caliph. As soon as their numbers were complete, Abu Bakr ascended the hill, reviewed the men, the horses, the arms, and poured forth a fervent prayer for the success of their undertaking. His instructions to the chiefs of the Syria were inspired by the warlike fanaticism which advances to seize and affects to despise the objects of earthly ambition. Remember, said the successor of the prophet, that you are always in the presence of God, on the verge of death, in the assurance of judgment and the hope of paradise. Avoid injustice and oppression. Consult your brethren and study to preserve the love and confidence of your troops. When you fight the battles of the Lord, acquit yourselves like men, without turning your backs, but let not your victory be stained with the blood of women or children. Destroy no palm trees, nor burn any fields of corn, cut down no fruit trees, nor do any mischief to cattle. Only do such as you kill to eat. When you make any covenant or article, stand to it and be as good as your word. As you go on, you will find some religious persons who live retired in monasteries and propose to themselves to serve God that way. Let them alone and neither kill them nor destroy their monasteries. And you will find another sort of people that belong to the synagogue of Satan who have shaven crowns. Be sure you cleave their skulls and give them no quarter, till they either turn Mohammedans or pay tribute. And we're all familiar, I believe, with that quote, but this is during the 5 months, the 150 years being marked at 9/11, that there was a passage that I read. I want to say it was one of the articles that I'm reading, but when it comes to killing women and children, and again, my question still is, when does that Islam actually strike? But we know that there's a hold placed on Islam, and we see here that though they are set loose, there is also a restraint. upon what they're limited in what they can do during this time. And we know that if they're limited in what they can do at this time, we know that there comes a time when that limit is released and they come in and utterly destroy. The invasion of Nicomedia by Othman parallels the attack of American soil on September 11th, 2001, marking the arrival of the third woe prophetically. 9/11 was not a hot war. It was just a response or punishment towards the United States when it misbehaves. That's the role of Islam, a scourge against Rome. It acts as a punishment against the apostasy of the King of the North. We're in the information age and we need to conceptualize the nature of this war. 9/11 was a sudden and unexpected attack like a scorpion. After the invasion of Nicomedia, we are told that it marked the rapid and destructive growth of the monster. We can see that progression after 9/11, going into becoming ISIS and ISIL. From 9/11 to 2019, we have been witnessing the rise of Islamic Kingdom, ISIS, whose root can be traced back in 2003 with the invasion of Iraq by the United States. We have the likes of Saddam Hussein, Osama bin Laden, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, and Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who announced himself a caliph in 2014 after capturing Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq. So Zarqawi had the dream of declaring a caliph. He was killed in, I believe it was 2006, and then Baghdadi actually finishes that work in 2014. In 2013, the largely secular anti-Assad opposition, represented by the Free Syrian Army, increasingly saw itself being eclipsed by a variety of Islamist militant groups. In November 2013, 7 Islamist religional militias merged to form the Islamic Front. The portion of the Islamist opposition with ties to Al-Qaeda and its Iraqi affiliate also continued to evolve. In April 2013, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, announced his intention to combine his forces in Iraq and Syria under the name of the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL. As known as the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria is ISIS. And I think we covered that last time, the difference between ISIL and ISIS, its location. The merger was rejected by the Nusra Front, infighting between the Nusra Front aligned with the faction of Al-Qaeda led by Zawahiri, and ISIL, the successor of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, followed. So this Nusra Front, I remember that being in the previous study, but it's a significant one. It's rejected by them. This merging is rejected by them, and there's infighting between them aligned with the faction of Al-Qaeda. But what I've seen in the studies that I've been doing, I think I said this earlier, is that there's been infighting within. And it's interesting because you just trace again what we know, where we're at, and on the movement, then the movement that we've been in, even if you go all the way back to your Adventism roots, is until you all become one, you can't be strong. Divided, you're conquered. And so there's still this struggle to all come together and be one, and even with ISIS. But as they continue to, if they continue to come together and do this merging, they can become a greater power. I don't know if that made sense, but that's what we see even within this movement, that God wants us all to be one. When we finally become one, we become this tool in his hand. And so it's interesting to see the same thing happens in all these different areas. And as long as you have divisions, you don't have unity, you don't have strength. In spite of its alienation from the Nusra Front, ISIL retained considerable strength in eastern Syria, establishing a zone of exclusive control in the Euphrates Valley centered on the city of al-Raqqa. In the areas ISIL controlled, it imposed a strict version of Islamic law. I'm trying to remember the video that I watched. Maybe everybody saw that one too. I can't remember, but I can't remember which one it was. But when I think it was one of the files that Elder Tess put in the media broadcast, but went through the stories of these people that their homes were destroyed during this time, but how they were told to live. Because when they come in, like it says here, when they come in and they control a territory, then they put everybody under this strict version of Islamic law. And imagine that happening to us, being put under a strict version of some type of law, which we see as we head into dictatorship here as well. So there's no freedom, there's no democracy, it's their way. And it's very brutal as well. And the punishment as well, that's where they start chopping off hands for stealing and all the various things that they do to punish and believe that they're doing God's will. It's also cultivated a reputation for brutality, staging public executions and killing or expelling non-Muslims. From eastern Syria, ISIL launched a series of successful operations in both Syria and Iraq. The western Iraqi cities of Al-Fallujah and Al-Ramadadi came under its control in early 2014, and a subsequent offensive captured Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq. In control of a wide swath of territory straddling the Iraq-Syria border, ISIL proclaimed the establishment of a caliphate with al-Baghdadi as caliph in June 2014. So they're declaring it now an Islamic state, and it's going to be ruled over this extreme Islamic law. Okay, July 27th, 1499, he's marking as the 9th of November, or Rafia.
I have a question on that last page.
Yeah.
So this caliph was just strictly in Iraq and Syria? That's the area they're controlling, and they're the ones saying they have the caliphate? Is that at the exclusion of Saudi Arabia?
Yes.
And, I guess Iran?
Yes, at this time, what they want is to be over everything. And as we've seen, I think Elder Tess has shown this, if I remember right, maybe somebody remembers the presentations, but how they went into Pakistan and went into Afghanistan, and what they set up is schools and start the education process. And that education process can transform an entire area. And so, but here in this 2014 to 2019, it was in the Syria, Iraq area. I want to say, because I'm pretty sure maybe somebody remembers it, but Baghdadi was, he was the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. I think we just read that. The leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. But during the Syrian war, this opened up the way for them to come in and try to seize more ground. And then that's what brought them to declare a caliphate. And they had parts of Syria when they captured Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq, and then went in through the Syrian war. And it's really it's hard to grasp it all because there were so many factions that were all fighting. It started out being like pro-democracy versus this this religious sect rule, Islamic State rule, this pro-democracy, and these protests that sparked all, and going back to Arab Spring, sparks all this in the whole region of the Middle East that spills over then on into Syria. And that, if I'm understanding correctly, opens up the way for ISIS to come in and conquer territory as well. So there's many different factions that were fighting. It wasn't just this. It wasn't just the Sunni and Shia. I think we covered that in the previous study. It wasn't just the Sunni and Shia. It's when all the other factions, the region, their geographical neighbors got involved, and then the United States got involved, and then Russia got involved, and everyone, all these different groups are all involved. And this brings ISIS to come in and be a part of it and conquer territory and declare themselves a caliphate.
I was just looking up the word caliphate. It says, is a term caliph is generally regarded to mean successor of the Prophet Muhammad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's what I was watching on those videos that I found yesterday on the beginning of the caliph, and that they want, it's like we have our government and what it is. They want to be the government. They want to be the government. They want to be church state and them in charge. And
what you were just describing, Sister Elaine, reminds me a lot of what we're seeing happen in the United States.
Yes.
With the protests and the different factions, like the right-wing supremacist groups, the extreme ones. And then what Richard was mentioning about the some in that movement who are for Black Lives Matter, if I understood him right, but are against Jews. They're hateful towards Jews. So there's like this left sounding radical group on the left side too, which sounds like what you were describing when they were having in Iraq, when the people didn't have really anybody in there, and those different extremist groups began to cause havoc. Sounds similar.
Like here, they're individual groups with all their own agenda. Brother Richard brought up that really good point where they don't all have the same agenda. Stephen Jackson, is that who you refer to? Is that his name?
Yes, Stephen Jackson.
So they don't all have the same agenda, but when they can come together and all have the same agenda, which is interesting because that's what God is wanting to do with us, is bring us all together with the same agenda. And that is to reflect Christ perfectly and enlarge his kingdom. Well, you take the mindset of like al-Baghdadi, who's now dead, but you have all these different factions that they, like the Nusra, is that how you, I don't know if that's how you say it, the Nusra Front, that they didn't want to merge because they still all have separate agendas. But in the end, you're all gonna, I think in the end, you're gonna have all, God's people are gonna be all of one agenda. Islam will be united all as one agenda, and then they become a power and a strength. I think Sister Allie has, I saw the thing go up.
Yeah, sorry, I know I asked it in the column, does ISIS still exist? According to what you're saying, it sounds like it does.
Well, Baghdadi was killed, and ISIS is the, did I back up one?
And also, what did Trump do when he claimed that he destroyed them? Did he?
The definition of ISIS, Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, that's the definition. So they declared an Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. And then ISIL is the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL. So it's the territory that they're over. What Trump did when he pulled out of Syria was, and I had that map I had that map in the previous study, I believe, where it showed the 4 years. I think it was 2014, 15, 16, 17, or maybe it was 16, 17, 18, 19, I think. And it showed the shrinking of their control. It's not that they don't exist, but it's or as a terrorist group, but the definition of them is that they're now ruling over this area in Syria and Iraq. That's what makes, they declare an Islamic state in that territory. So they shrunk their control down to near nothing.
Yeah.
Trump pulled out of Syria, that opened the way for them to come back up.
Okay, but they're no longer in Mosul, because I remember that part in the documentary that when Trump, okay, because they talked through the three presidents, Bush Jr., and then Obama's administration, how he was handling it, and then when Trump came into power, and Trump brags about how he destroyed ISIS, which he didn't, but he did push them out of Mosul, right? Like, does that ring a bell to you, or?
I'd have to go back and look at that particular battle. I think there might be some of that, not in this study, but maybe in the other ones that we have coming up.
Yeah.
The actual Battle of Mosul. I know there was a video that Brother Itabo sent me, but it was one of those ones I couldn't open. And it was on that battle in Mosul, because I don't fully understand, with all the different entities involved, I don't recall who and how and where that they wound up shrinking and getting them out of Mosul.
Okay, thanks.
But it was when he did pull out the troops that left the Kurds in great danger. I know that. And the Kurds, from what I remember, were part of the greatest work against ISIS. But yeah, it takes trying to wrap my head around each and every one of these individual factions. And then because like with Turkey, they believe that the Kurds were terrorists run by the United States. So there's so many, they all have different perspectives on who's doing what as well, which makes it very complicated to understand. And I found it fascinating to kind of pull back and just look at some of the bigger picture when it comes to, you know, the control over the Middle East. Why control over the Middle East? And the Middle East is a central key place to that they view as ruling the world over. And it's amazing that God placed his people in the center of that region. You know what I mean? From all along, and that they've always been there in the center of all that region. So, and I mean back in ancient Israel, but to have placed all of that there, and always have these battles going on throughout history. So, and I don't think I read this. Yeah, we read this one. So now July 27th, 1499, and we stop at 12:30, is that right? Somebody? I think it's 12:30.
12:30.
Okay. Okay. So July 27th, he's marking as Raphia, 1499, the end of the 150 years, he's marking as Raphia. Greek Emperor Constantine Diocletian voluntarily surrenders to Islam Sultan Amurath. In the year 1449, John Pelagios, the Greek emperor, died, but left no children to inherit his throne, and Constantine Diocletian succeeded to it. But he would not venture to ascend the throne without the consent of the Amurath, the Turkish Sultan. He therefore sent ambassadors to ask his consent and obtained it before he presumed to call himself sovereign. We've been marking Raphia as a win for the King of the South, Russia, against the King of the North, the United States. This marks the activity of Russia conquering the United States over the issue of the spheres of influence, among other subjects. For Donald Trump to take the presidential seat, he had to surrender his allegiance of the United States Constitution to Russia, which meddled in the 2016 US presidential election. This can be traced back from 2013 to 14, an alliance between Putin and Donald Trump and Trump's road to the White House. And that's another, I don't know if that's he's referencing, but there's Frontline has that, those videos on Trump and getting to the White House. And we're all familiar with the collusion. So 2014 parallels 303 BC in the line of Pyrrhus in Macedonia, an alliance between Demetrius, the king of the north, and Pyrrhus, the king of the south. Donald Trump allowed Russia to interfere in the US 2016 election. He was not largely elected by the consent of his own people, but through Russia, a foreign power just like Turkish Sultan, who allowed Diocletian to take the throne of Greece. The war between Russia and the United States has been through spheres of influence. We can look at the perspective of Ukraine, Venezuela, Syria, China, Africa, and Libya that culminate with the prediction of November 9, 2019. However, this can well be demonstrated in the election of Donald Trump in 2016. Raffia cannot be disconnected from other waymarks like 2014, which are stepping stones. If we would strain our muscles to conceptualize our history and Millerite history, especially Daniel 1140, the Millerites, Josiah Litch, focused on Turkey, Islam, we have come to realize how Russia is an important entity in the prophetic field. We thought it was dead in 1991 after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, but through compare and contrast of 1798 and 1989, we saw a resurrection of the King of the South, Russia, in our history. The resurrection began in 1999 with the presidency of Putin, and we'll discuss more in our last presentation as we look at the understanding of Daniel 1140 in our history for the fourth generation. So 1451, the death of Amurath. The death of Amurath in 1451 and the succession of Muhammad II, a wily man full of ambition and restless of restraint, did not retard the conquest. Muhammad's one design was to capture Constantinople. Peace was on his lips, but war was in his heart, and every energy was bent toward the accomplishment of this design. At midnight, he once started from his bed and demanded the immediate attendance of his prince vizier. The man came trembling, fearing the detection of some previous crime. He made his offering to the Sultan, but was met with the words, "I ask a present far more valuable and important, Constantinople." Muhammad II tested the loyalty of his soldiers, warned his ministers against the bribery of the Romans, studied the art of war and the use of firearms. He engaged the services of a founder of Canaan who promised weapons that could batter down the walls of the city. That was Stephen Haskell. The death of Amurath demands careful examination in our application before 2021. Muhammad II made thorough preparation before he besieged Constantinople in 1453. How does that look like before 2021 in our history? Does the responsible death of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in 2019, the ISIS caliph, by Trump administration have any implication as we approach 2021? 2019 marks a restraint of Islam, which is to be loosed from 2021 as a destructive tool against the United States as it changes from constitution democracy to a dictatorial form. (1453), 2021 Panium, the attack on the wall of Constantinople. He, Muhammad II, accordingly made preparations for besieging and taking the city. The siege commenced on the 6th of April, 1453, and ended in the taking of the city. The death of the last of the Constantines on the 16th day of May following, and the eastern city of the Caesars became the seat of the Ottoman Empire. So 1453 is lining up with Panium, when they take the seat of the Ottoman Empire. And I think maybe we'll stop it here because we haven't gotten to Balaam, and maybe we'll pick up on Balaam next week.
So are you doing the next study on next Sabbath, or is it going to be Wednesday?
Oh, that's right. We might do it Wednesday. What works best for everybody? Because we're still working on reviewing the lines. What works best for everybody?
Well, don't do it during the week because then I'll miss out.
Okay. Then we'll
Sorry
do
for
it.
being selfish, but you know, I don't want to miss out.
No, that's okay. Then we'll pick this up.
Do you want to keep doing it for this afternoon? Because I keep getting unstable internet things on my computer.
It's up to everybody else. To me, like I said, it's a lot of information, and but the most I pray that it perks us all to really start watching these videos and understanding Islam. We know we have a lot to understand and get ourselves right, but we also need to understand who Islam is and who these different factions are, and so that we can better understand on the lines what Islam is going to do.
Well, I want to also add, I don't want to be selfish again, but I can't do it this afternoon. I need a break. I need to work on my studies for next week. Sorry.
Okay, we'll let everybody else decide.
Yeah.
And next
Yeah, I
Sabbath,
think,
we have our camp, and actually next Sabbath we have our camp meeting anyway, so we won't be finishing it next week. Everybody, what were you going to say, Brother Richard?
I was just thinking about Wednesdays. The time you guys stay is a little bit late for us here in Arkansas.
Yeah.
So if next on Sabbaths would be probably ideal for us to go through a study that's going to require a lot of mental energy. I'm not saying that in a bad way. It's very positive.
It does.
Just so we don't be sleepy.
Me too. So, next week is our monthly Zoom camp meeting, and that was already on the schedule a while back. So we won't pick up until the following week, and that gives me actually time because I really want to work on the House of Sod for the next study, because that really goes into where Wahhabism came from and the interaction that transpires. There's a whole bunch of notes that I want to put together of how the interaction between the United States and Saudi Arabia works. I'm still trying to figure it out and confused my own self with Saudi Arabia brings this religious sect in to do work. It's like they play the middle in both sides, and I don't know if that's right, but that's what I'm kind of seeing as we go through it. But so we'll finish this. It'll be 2 weeks, and we'll go into Balaam as well. If we do any of it on Wednesday, we would just repeat it, and we'll leave that to the Wednesday group, because sometimes it's good to do that. Repetition is good, especially when we're trying to handle a lot of heavy material. But I encourage us to try to watch the videos that are out there. Frontline has really good videos on this if we haven't watched them. Try to understand more of what a caliph is. What does it mean when they're setting up an Islamic state? Who is Sunni, who's Shia, who supports who? Because we know that when we get to Panium, that the king of the south loses his spheres of influence, and it's going to involve Syria. So we should be able to, by studying this and coming to understand the past and studying what has happened, we should be able to come to see in advance, I would think, the loss of spheres of influence. And there are a lot of articles out there, and I know that the media broadcast has posted a lot of these articles too, when it comes to the activities of Russia in the Middle East. One that we were mentioning last week or the week before, I can't remember, on Russia, one that I was reading, there was a few that were around this topic, but how Russia wants to woo the crown prince, Saudi Arabia, to his side and away from dependence on the United States. So, and in that aspect, kind of biting off more than he can chew. So there's a lot of information out there to still be studied to understand, and understanding this history and how Islam operates, how they came about, and what their agenda is to where we're at today, to be able to help us to understand what Panium would look like. So yeah, so we'll finish it in 2 weeks then. And then by then I might be able to get started on or I've already kind of started, but on the House of Saud as well. Any comments or questions? I know it's a lot of material.
What are we doing this afternoon?
Esther.
Okay, thank you.
Esther. Yeah.
What's the time frame for that again?
For Esther? Or for?
Yes.
For Esther, we take a break for lunch for an hour and then we come back.
So an hour from now.
Yeah, an hour from now. And we're going to start looking at Esther prophetically through parables. And we want all the minds involved.
Yeah, that one's a hard one. Well,
yeah. So, well, praise God that he can help sharpen our minds. So who wants to close in prayer? Brother Richard, would you like to close in prayer?
Yes, I'll close in prayer. 1 second. Father in heaven, Lord, we thank you so much for blessing us with this time to go over Islam and to gain understanding, Lord. It's been a truly amazing Sabbath thus far, Lord, and even with all these different dynamics to the study, Lord, we all are beginning to understand a little bit clearer what Islam's role is and the waymarks that help us to see Islam in its true light and how they affect us all in this world. So we just thank you, Lord. We thank you for Sister Elaine's time she's given to the study and to be able to help us all to learn more, Lord, of what it means, Lord, to be standing in the light of your word, Lord, to be a lamp in this world for others to see. But we see so many of these same aspects of liberalism and conservatism in the Islamic world, and we see how it impacts them. And the same thing has happened to us, Lord. So I pray, like Elder Tess said, we will be morally conservative, but socially liberal. I pray we have that perfect balance, Lord, that reflects you and that shows love for all mankind, even for those who hate us, Lord. So we thank you for this opportunity to share and to grow together, Lord. And we ask that you would be with us throughout the rest of the Sabbath. We praise you, Lord, and in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Yeah, I still have a lot of thoughts on the strike and just if anybody's up to it, not now, but I mean during the break, when I was reading Isaiah 13 and thinking of Revelation 18, there's a lot of thoughts on when do they actually strike, because they come in and do the final destruction. So I just have my own thoughts on what that implies, but I want to keep studying it through to have the history and the lines tell us what is going to happen. So, well, anyways, we'll break for lunch. We're back at 1:40 then, Adriana?
Yeah, 1:40 is good. Don't
Okay.
forget to stop recording.
You can stop it.
No, you're the one recording.